It is the year 1932, and the Thatcham residence is fussing about their young member's wedding day. As breakfast is being prepared and her siblings wake up, the main character of the event is forced to spend some time crouched near a toilet. To her, the morning is not as cheerful as others. Downstairs, a mysterious young man named Joseph suddenly enters the kitchen and greets Milman, the head servant, like an old friend. He seems to be quite familiar with the residents and with Dolly too. Even though nobody was expecting him to attend the occasion, he still came, explaining that Dolly wanted him to show up. As we learn from the short and delightful conversation between him and Milman, the friendship between Joseph and Thatcham ended with him going off to Greece. Joseph doesn't seem to like mentioning this event. As he responded, almost annoyed, Dolly went rushing to Albania as well. Not to upset Dolly, he asks Milman to leave his arrival a secret at this moment. While Dolly shows no signs of happiness or excitement, and while two other characters, Kitty and Evelyn, discuss the upcoming wedding, Joseph starts settling in. He meets with Jimmy, Dolly's little cousin, and gives him a present, as two ladies hypothesize that his arrival will surely cause big drama. Compared to Dolly, they are extremely excited to see what will happen. Soon, other members of the family, Robert and Tom, start pouring into the living room. Tom is a particularly interesting figure. He offers alcohol to everybody and prepares an egg yolk for himself. Overall, the young members of the family seem to be quite cheerful, sarcastic, and funny. It is when Mrs. Thatcham arrives home and joins the company in the living room that Joseph finally decides to show himself to the family. The young ones are delighted to see him, but the same cannot be said about Mrs. Thatcham. Evelyn leaves the room. Joseph's attention is taken by a single silver object. It looks like a folding ashtray, resembling a turtle. And it is exactly how Dolly behaves this morning. Like a turtle. To end the waiting mode, Joseph sneaks upstairs in the next scene, pauses at her door, and knocks. Transporting to the past, we see a similar situation, with the exception that the atmosphere is a lot warmer. Joseph is knocking on a door, and Dolly opens it up immediately. They look much younger, and they look like two individuals who are drowning in love. In the present, Dolly doesn't rush to the door at all. After hearing his voice, a state of anxiety takes over her mind, and she tells him that she is not prepared to come out yet. She doesn't even specify approximately when she will be finished, so Joseph has to just inform her of his arrival and go back downstairs. As usual, a chaotic atmosphere breaks out between the family members, and Dolly remembers that warm day as well. In her memory, she rushes to the door, sees Joseph in the sunny rain, and hears him say that he's come to say goodbye. In the next scene, two new characters, Nancy and David, enter the living room as well. David seems to be a member of the family, and his wife seems to hate all the traits they possess. Time passes, and Dolly remains in her room while memories keep coming to Joseph. This time, we get to see how the two met each other. In a cricket field, Dolly is walking with her friend, discussing something heedlessly. Suddenly, a ball is thrown in the air, and it becomes evident to everyone that it is going straight in Dolly's direction. Nobody, not even Dolly, does anything to prevent a serious injury. However, only Joseph dashes forward, takes one big leap, and casts it in the air. He ends up lying inside the ruin of a broken table, but it was absolutely worth it. Now, he is anxious to see her again. During the dinner, when the jokes are thrown around the breakfast table in the dining room, we learn that Mrs. Thatcham is on her nerves as well. A slightly naughty surprise is being prepared beneath the table in the meantime. We should expect an explosive end to the breakfast. Dolly drinks far too much upstairs, while suddenly, Mr. Owen, his future husband, makes an unexpected appearance in the dining room. He apologizes for coming in so heedlessly and tells them about the reason for his arrival. As it seems, Dolly had her ring taken to a jeweler to make it smaller. She was supposed to give it over to Owen's brother then, but apparently she has forgotten to do so. Robert is sent to her room. Before he returns, another member of the family, Bella, appears in the dining room and greets Mrs. Thatcham. The groom is forced to witness the customary family chaos, and it all goes to a point where Mrs. Thatcham explodes at her late father's brother, Bob. She reserves herself immediately but tells Tom to take his father outside. After breakfast, Joseph and Owen, two individuals who know that they both love one girl, have a conversation. As both maintain their manners, we learn that Owen is planning to go to Argentina and take Dolly with him. Robert and Tom run into the living room then, and even though they go down on the floor squabbling about something silly, Owen feels forced to interrupt them. He wants to know if the ring was found, and to raise his anxiety even more, he is told that Dolly doesn't remember where she put it. An unexpected thing happens then. Joseph quietly puts the turtle piece back in its place and tells Evelyn, non-verbally, to open it up. So that no one notices anything out of place, Evelyn moves towards the turtle, opens it up, and turns around in acceleration. The ring seems to have been inside. Owen is delighted and relieved, and the waiting process continues as before. Time ticks on, and questions start raging in Joseph's head even more. He finds himself unable to understand why he was called to attend the wedding. He doesn't even understand why Dolly is getting married to a widower who won't even be there for her. Evelyn is urged to leave because he doesn't want to cause trouble, but these are the exact words Joseph wants to tell Dolly. Mrs. Thatcham understands this, so she asks Nancy to keep a sharp eye on Dolly's old friend, Joseph. As time passes, Joseph finds it more and more difficult to control his emotions. All he wants to speak about is Dolly, and in all conversations, he asks where she will come down. Tearing up to the prospect of seeing her and wishing her luck before she's a married woman, he stands at the foot of a staircase together with Kitty, while Dolly gives herself to memories again. This time, she remembers the time Joseph gave her a tortoise as a gift. Immersed entirely in a delightful memory, she is soon interrupted by Kitty and Evelyn. Finding out the half-empty bottle of rum in her room and seeing her sorrowful as ever, Kitty fails to hide her annoyance. All she wants is to get married, and seeing the people and not appreciating their chance to be happy drives her mad. In the midst of a moment, she mentions that Joseph has been annoying her as well, and naturally, Dolly becomes all ears. She tries not to show her anxiety, but she remains highly vigilant. A smile appears on her face as Kitty tells her and Evelyn what happened down the staircase. As it seems, Kitty immersed herself in a lengthy monologue about poetry and warm love, and emphasized how Englishmen lack both. For some reason, this made Joseph angry. Hearing what he said suddenly lifts Dolly's mood. When Kitty storms out of the room in fury, however, the bride is soon drawn by anxiousness and restless thoughts again. For the first time, she shares what's going on in her mind. Feeling like a person's life story is about to end, she wonders what would happen if Joseph begged her to run away with him. She does say that she wants to marry Owen, but she doesn't seem very truthful while doing it. In the end, she becomes more incongruent with herself by saying that all is well, but then turns to honesty and asks Evelyn to come to Argentina with her. She doesn't want to feel alone there. As she says, Owen wants her to tag along as well. Evelyn assures her that she won't miss it for the world, but her motive for doing so is still a little foggy. Mrs. Thatcham enters the room then and interrupts their conversation. Once Evelyn returns downstairs, she tries to put a veil on her daughter's head, but the bride is still reluctant to put an end to her preparation process. Sending her mother off once more, she immerses herself in memories again. She is reading Tolstoy's Family Happiness when her mother enters the living room. Dolly is in love, and knowing that her man will soon be off to Greece, she is in a particularly gloomy mood. Noticing this, Mrs. Thatcham comes up with the idea to offer her a trip to Albania. In her mind, this will make her forget about Joseph, but as we now know, her plan has a serious flaw. The kind of love Dolly feels for Joseph won't be forgotten that easily. Even now, just before she goes over to the church to be married to someone else, the memories of how she danced with Joseph one night at a Sunday dance are playing in her mind on repeat. In memory, the waltz is played after much faster music. Kitty has her foot hurt by Tom, and craving a better partner, she scolds him nonstop as Joseph and Dolly have a delightful conversation in front of her. Suddenly, Tom is stolen from her, so now she has nobody to dance with. Noticing that Kitty wants to get in the field much more than her sister, Joseph acts like a proper gentleman and invites her to dance with him. Dolly seems to be delighted by her man's manners. She watches her sister as the latter follows Joseph's movements, and in this moment of utter harmony, thoughts of future farewell suddenly enter her consciousness. It is a shame that everything led to this moment in the present when both Joseph and Dolly are in separate rooms, thinking about the upcoming wedding that isn't theirs. Finally, Dolly finds it in herself to go downstairs. Pausing in front of the door, behind which a car is already waiting for her, she hopes to hear Joseph's voice. This is the exact moment when the man follows a voice inside, urging him to use the last chance he will ever get. Before he manages to run downstairs, where the bride is waiting for him, Dolly is asked to go into the kitchen to say goodbye to Mrs. Whitstable. As the old lady goes on about how happy and proud Dolly will be of her husband, Joseph runs around the house in search of her, but all in vain. Soon, Dolly finds out that Mrs. Whitstable thinks she is getting married to Joseph. The old lady remembers how happy Dolly looked last summer, and the bride is assured, to her terror, that getting married to someone else will be the end of her happiness. Coming out of the kitchen, she pours one more glass of rum for herself, and her heart starts racing ever more greatly. When she steps out into the entranceway, something unexpected and fateful happens to her. The lovers run into each other, and like in a fairy tale you would hear in a drunken tavern, her wedding dress is stained by a good amount of rum. Almost electrocuted by anxiousness, Joseph tries to put together a sentence, as Dolly repeats to him to come up with a solution. After a few seconds, she tells him to fetch a white scarf from her room, and even though Joseph wants it badly enough to propose running away, he is forced to follow the bride's suggestion. After coming back, he tries to attach the scarf to the stain while Ben restlessly calls for Dolly to come out. For the first time today, the couple remembers properly what it feels like to be in each other's presence. When the dress is taken care of and the tension reaches its highest point, Joseph attempts to get her back once more, but he manages to say nothing else by her name. Dolly doesn't let him recollect himself in this moment, Saying that time and tide wait for no man, she gets outside and drives away to get married. The most colorful memory comes to her then. It is of a day when she and Joseph went to have a picnic together with Evelyn, Owen, and others. Riding a river and rowing across it, the couple seems as happy as ever. It is one of those days when you are not conscious of your happiness. On this impossibly delightful day, Dolly is so in love with Joseph that she doesn't even look at Owen during the picnic. Like every meaningful memory, however, this one contains some unpleasant moments as well. Walking away from the company for a moment, Joseph asks Dolly to go to Argentina with him, but receives nothing but a hunch from her. His initial suggestion is rejected immediately, and his mood is quickly changed. Symbolically, this is a moment when they encounter a dreadful scene of a dead fox in the grass, and Joseph decides to get back to others. When he is asked why he's in such a hurry, he responds that time and tide wait for no man. Dolly is no less angry at him. When everybody gets into their separate boats, Dolly tries to leave him stranded on the shore by paddling away by herself. She loses one of the paddles, however, and soon realizes that she won't go so far. Joseph realizes that something is wrong. Dropping his hat, he jumps in the water headfirst and soon appears in the boat. Dolly admits why she ran away like that. He wanted Joseph to come after her. In the present time, Joseph remembers this story as well. At this point, he is the only guest left at the residence. The old lady gives him some peace of her mind as well, but their conversation is much less tense and much more calmly sorrowful. Joseph speaks with Millman as well. Feeling confused, he asks her why people get married and gets the response that it is almost always circumstances that play the main role. It is by chance that Dolly is getting married to Owen. Mrs. Thatcham sent her over to Albania, and this is how events spiraled down towards where they stand now. After hearing this position, Joseph wishes to call a taxi and go back to the station. Taxis usually take a lot of time, however, so he will get a chance to reconsider. Going into the entranceway again, he sees the door, and the memory reminds him once more. This is the memory of the last time he saw her. Knowing that they will soon drift away, Dolly takes him to a greenhouse, and as words lose meaning, she kisses him for the first time. Mrs. Whitstable passes by the lone building and, thanks to her sight problems, fails to notice the two figures intertwined with each other. She stops in front of them, however, and the couple freezes in place immediately. After the old lady walks away, Joseph sighs in relief, remembering that Mrs. Whitstable is blind. Dolly, however, thinks quite the opposite. Even though the old lady is blind, it is widely believed that she sees everything. In the present time, the company returns from church. Joseph is still here, waiting for a taxi, when young Jimmy comes up to him, angry that he wasn't at the church to light a big bomb. Joseph tells him grievingly that he must go soon and gives him one last task, to fire an explosion in his place. Meanwhile, Kitty sees Bella's driver from a foreign country and realizes that he is exactly the kind of man she desires. Soon, the usual chaos breaks out in the residence again. But it's still calm with Evelyn and Joseph. The latter's sorrow is expressed in his every word, no matter if it's connected to Dolly or not, and here, Evelyn gives him much-needed insight. Remembering the dishonest vow Dolly made a few hours ago, she says that no one should wait for someone else to make a decision for them. Meanwhile, Joseph is the main subject of discussion between Mrs. Thatcham and Nancy. The mother of the family views him as an amusing young man. If you ask her, this is exactly the reason why Dolly is so attracted to him. The time to take the wedding picture comes then, and the mother suggests Joseph order a taxi. The man responds with the same politeness and the same underlying enmity that he has already done that but won't find it in himself to leave without wishing a happy couple some good luck. Speaking of the happy couple, Dolly's expression in the photo doesn't convey much happiness. Neither her mother nor she seems to be flying over the moon. Knowing that, thanks to Joseph, the wedding won't end well, she smiles anxiously and waits for a disaster to unfold. She has a memory of her own to remember. Compared to Mrs. Whitstable, she saw her daughter with Joseph vividly on that rainy day. In the present day, the newlywed couple walks inside the house. Behind her, Joseph runs up to Kitty and begs her to give Dolly a message from him. He wants her to tell her sister that Joseph sent his love. This is all, and he won't do it himself since he's sure that the last thing Dolly wants now is to see him. The last thing Kitty wants is to run messages for Joseph, but the proper negotiation is conducted, and she decides to do it anyway. The procession enters the living room then. After a toast is raised cheerfully, Kitty carries out her mission, and Joseph sees how the expression on Dolly's face changes abruptly. Soon, we see her walk upstairs to her room and start taking her wedding attire off, while Joseph goes into a library to wait for her reply. Memories draw their minds as the decision is made and the normal clothes are put on. In the next scene, Nancy sees Dolly walking up to her and asking her about Joseph. She knows that it is her task to stand in the way of ruining this wedding, but deciding not to pay any heed to this assignment, she indicates Dolly where her love is. Once the couple is together in the library, Nancy prevents anyone from entering their space. Joseph and Dolly have been avoiding a real conversation for the duration of the entire day, and even now, they continue to do so. Their reunion is sadly filled with surface discussion. Only gradually do they manage to leave their shells and begin speaking about what is really going on. Even then, however, their defenses do not permit them to remain fully honest with one another. It is clear that Dolly wants Joseph to show great commitment. If only he asks her to marry him instead, Dolly will surely drop everything and follow him. But Joseph fails to do it. Instead, he is still angry at her for not following him in Greece 1 year ago. The thought of how she was led to marry Owen fills him with bitterness. Dolly realizes, in the end, that Joseph will not commit to her. She passes him by with an intention to walk out of the door forever, but suddenly, her arm is grabbed, and the two kiss each other passionately when, unexpectedly, they hear the door opening behind them. Immediately, the couple breaks away and spreads apart as Owen looks inside. Clueless and with no suspicion whatsoever, he stands there and argues with Dolly about the tortoise coming on the ship with them. This conversation comes in contrast with the situation in such a way that it almost makes it comical. All of this until Owen finishes up the conversation by mentioning that arguing won't do any good. The tortoise has run away, people have been looking for him, and there's no trace of him in the immediate area around the house. Mrs. Thatcham comes inside the room as well. Compared to Owen, she immediately understands the heads and tails of the situation, and once Dolly storms out, she urges Joseph with a harsh tone to admit defeat. A drop of tears rolls down Joseph's face once he is left all alone in the library. Just before Owen drives away, Dolly and her love share one final gaze before they drift away. Compared to Joseph, David and Nancy seem to be in a quite cheerful mood all of a sudden. They are one of the couples for whom this wedding turned out fruitful. Positive change is starting to take place in their relationship as they allow themselves to be less restricted, like their child, Jimmy. Before walking away from the living room, David puts a large pack of explosives on the coffee table. After some hilarious conflicts are taken care of behind Joseph, he is spotted by Mrs. Thatcham. Deciding to give him a proper bitter bite, she says out loud that some men never fail to think only about themselves. Articulating this, she throws the bag of explosives in the hearth, thinking that it's just a bunch of papers that could be burned. Joseph chose not to respond. He keeps looking out the window with a sorrowful face as Mrs. Thatcham continues to give him a lecture. Her speaking is the only thing breaking the silence in the room. And soon, she is so taken by the flow of her lecture that she begins shouting at the young man. She fails to understand what is going on with him and why he is so self-centered in a situation that demands the opposite attitude. Joseph breaks his silence here, emphasizing that Mrs. Thatcham usually fails to understand every subtle detail around her. He makes sure everybody knows about the truth behind Dolly's hasteful marriage. He says that there can be only one reason why she's been in such a hurry to get married. She's pregnant and might well be with his child. The room gets increasingly tense as conflict breaks out. Other people join in as well and suggest to him that he stop talking such nonsense. But Joseph knows he's speaking the honest truth. Naturally, the conflict isn't resolved. Mrs. Thatcham starts crying from confusion as Joseph finishes up his speech by stating one last truth. Dolly has broken his heart, and it is all his fault. It is when he finally walks out into the entranceway that the bag catches fire and explodes in culmination. In contrast to the general mood theme, David and Nancy find the circumstances quite amusing. They seem to be rekindling passion in their relationship. Soon, Joseph walks out of the main door, and the vision of his love appears in his mind once more. Before he manages to take a step forward, something happens that gives him a life-changing nudge. Millman comes outside with a large box covered in cloth. Handing it to Joseph, she points out that Mrs. Whitstable sent it to him. It seems the old lady was very insistent about it, and soon Joseph understood why. Raising a piece of the cloth, he sees Dolly's tortoise beneath it. Now he knows what exactly to do. Expressing heartfelt gratitude, he says goodbye to Millard, misses his taxi, and walks away from the residence decisively with the intention of getting back his love.